Hi, thank you for joining us for the Public Narrative Podcast. I'm your host, Jhmira Alexander, and I'm joined here with Lakeisha Gray-Sewell. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm
course.
so delighted to be here.
Of course. Lakeisha leads is the founder of Girls Like Me Project. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
So Girls Like Me Project works with Black girls specifically and unapologetically, just to help them to push back against the stereotypes and stigmas that are promoted in media. And so we help them understand like who is creating these messages and the why. So all media literacy, right? And then we give them tools to help them create their own stories and to tell their own narratives and their own realities, but in a way that not just shares the narrative, but also shifts the reality and transforms their everyday experiences.
Now, what experience led you to create this?
Oh, wow. So many. So I'll start at my beginning when I was a girl. When I was a girl, we had Thelma from Good Times. And then we had Vanessa and Denise Huxtable. And then we had Whitley Gilbert, Denise Huxtable, and all these other people. So in my everyday, although I live not far from here, actually, in what was then known as the Low End or Bronzeville, where poverty was all around me, violence, right, all of those things. But the escape was media. Media showed us a different world of what we could be, the possibilities, right? The potentiality beyond what was our everyday. And then too, we also had all around us like these names of sheroes and heroes who contributed. And so media messaging, whether it was on a school building or a library, being named after a great icon, or in television, I saw another way. Fast forward, I also majored in communications at SIU Carbondale. Fast forward to having my own child and he going to a school. And what I saw was a lot of the little girls were doing this aggressive, assertive behavior to boys and to each other. So it was a lot of mean girl behavior, and then these untoward, inappropriate, I don't want to use the word sexual because that would be too much, but it was definitely something that was not age appropriate in how they were interacting with young boys. And what I noticed was at the time, this was the beginning, the birth of reality TV. So this was my teenage pregnancy time, Bad Girls Club, Sweet 16, Flavor, all of these things. And then Real Housewives of Atlanta had just come out as well. And so I knew it was a mimicking of this reality TV when one of the little girls said, "Who gonna check me, boo?" And I knew that that line came specifically from a reality TV show. And so I'm like, okay, this is not going to work. We're gonna have to interrupt this. And I know it's because of the media. So why don't we start this program in the school? I started volunteering in my son's classroom because I'd already been volunteering and on the board for the parent-teacher, president of the board. But I wanted to make it a more intentional interaction with them, a more intentional program. So we started this ladies' lunch. We used a book called The Skin I'm In by Sharon G. Flake. And then we also kind of helped them to see like what were they listening to and watching and seeing how it was showing up. And it took off. That was 4th grade. By the time they got to 8th grade, they were in our program consistently. And by the time they got to 8th grade and were ready to graduate, and the transformation that I saw, not just in their own personal, but with each other, the sisterhood, the accountability that they had for each other, I knew that I didn't want to do this as a volunteer or on the side thing. I definitely wanted to dedicate my life. And it felt like a calling, really. That I've been trying to run from, because who wants to do nonprofit, right? And so I answered the call and really established my organization as a 501c3.
That's excellent. That's excellent. What I'm finding just in the different interviews that we've done on this podcast is that everyone we've talked to, folks are indeed change makers. And it was some kind of problem in society that they saw, that they didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait for support. They literally put a plan together and moved out. And whoever was with them was with them. Whoever was not, whatever the case. But it didn't stop being able to begin to shift and create the world that you wanted to live in. And ultimately, from the sounds of it, you wanted other little girls to have the experience you wanted little girls to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's build it and they will come, right? You know the problem is there. the people experiencing this problem are there, and the problem is there, and whatever else comes with that, the resources, the support, that will come later. But the resolution to the problem has to start before you wait. If you wait for everything to be right, if you wait for all the resources, then, and what I found is that when people see that you've already invested your own, like, for me, blood, sweat, tears, money, everything. And I will also say there's some selfishness too, right? It's not all altruistic. I think about, well, these are the girls that my son will choose to marry, or, you know, and I also think about my own daughter and how it impacts her life. So it was both. It was the altruistic, serving the people and making sure that our babies and the future generations are good, but then also, like, we have to have some self-interest as well. And I want to make sure that my son's peers, boys or girls, have everything that he has access to.
No, that's powerful. Who have been, like, among your own influencers, like, that you've been inspired by?
Oh boy, so dead or alive?
Dead or alive.
So Ida B. Wells guides the whole premise to our organization. When she said the people must know before they can act, that is what I live by. And I don't care what we're talking about. If we're talking about growth, anything, the people need to know the facts. People need to know historical context. People need to understand their own powers and things that are working against them. And then also their own superpowers. And so when you educate, share information, they can then you can give a call to action. So Ida B. Wells off top. Maya Angelou is who I named my daughter after. And I love her because her stories for me saved my life. In the library, when I was being bullied or when I felt like I didn't have lunch money to eat, I would go into the library and read my life away. And it was in the all of her books, her anthologies and her series. Everyday living, I would say that I take inspiration from Chicago history, women in history, Jacqueline Trish Atkins, who was one of the first Black women to sit on the board for the Chicago Foundation for Women, and a couple of other really renowned organizations in this city who's doing powerful work. Oh boy, who else? I also think about my grandmothers, both of them, my maternal and my paternal grandmother, and how they shared stories about our families, about me as a little girl. And when you hear those things, you kind of like, did I do that, right? And you start listening back to some of the things that have happened in your family and the things that that you don't even know about, but that are cellular, right, epigenetically speaking. And so I take that away as well. And then I just have to think about my teachers and my principals in CPS schools, specifically Yvette Miner for Walter H. Diet, which was a middle school when I attended in the dinosaur ages. But when I attended, it was a middle school. Now, of course, it's a high school, one of the ones that survived the closings. But Yvette Miner, she had people come to us every week almost. People were in our building, professionals. She had the woman who created 227, who was from Chicago.
Gibbs,
not Marla Gibbs, the actual writer and creator. And Marla Gibbs is also from Chicago too, but this woman lived on 48th in Indiana, 2 blocks over from me, right? And she was talking about how she made $10,000 every episode. She created the show, but every time the show came on, she got royalties and she was writing. And it was what I wanted to do. I want to write, right? And so to have that example. So those are just a few of those,
No, that's excellent. So what about your own personal narrative helps you to shine in this work?
I think about that a lot, right? What is my own superpower? I guess that's another way of asking. So I know this is my lived experience. Like, I'm not reading anything or getting this out of somebody else's life. This is what I have lived through. I've lived through being a stereotype, being called poor, low income, single mother, all these different titles that mean nothing, but that policy impacts, that public perception impacts. And you feel so small sometimes when you show up and people say, oh, well, because this is your zip code or this is your background, this is what you get, right? This is what you deserve. And over here, this smorgasbord of all these other resources and access is what people who come from this other background can. And so, for me, when I say unapologetic, I mean that. I mean, we don't have to be pristine. We don't have to be refined. We don't have to be distilled. We don't have to be perfect beings. We don't have to comb our hair in certain ways. Or I don't want our girls clipping their language or clipping their tongue. I want them to show up in their full magic, because I know that is the thing. When I do that, and not try to fit in or alter myself or tuck myself in, that's when I see a shift. That's when I see things actually change. And so I just use that as a driving force for how I show up and do my work.
Now, how does your work impact the public narrative?
So the public narrative, well, we know, I'll use Darnella Frazier as an example. Everybody knows who George Floyd is. And the only reason they know who George Floyd is because a 17-year-old black girl named Darnella Frazier took out her phone and used that phone for amplifying and bringing awareness to injustice. And so I think my work changes the public narrative because we empower black girls to understand the power that they have to tell the stories, to show the world what injustice looks like, to use media as an advocacy tool, to help educate and share information. And I think when we do that, just like Ida B. Wells said, we can tell the people how to act and the people can follow that. It can influence legislation. It can influence public policy in terms of even institutional policy, right? These schools with this 0 to, right to jail or pipeline to prison, or these schools with this 0 tolerance where black girls, for any infraction that's looked at as aggressiveness, they're suspended or expelled. We change that by doing that work.
You mentioned that about policy, and it made me think about the Crown Act, where it's illegal to discriminate against black women because of our hairstyles.
Yes. Yeah. And can you believe that just passed in 2022?
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But then we look back in New Orleans, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but we think back where black women had to have their hair in these wraps. They had to wrap their hair because they were said to entice white men to make them want to sleep with them and become their mistresses. And so these type of laws have always tried to impede upon our natural beauty of who we are and try to make us feel less than and really control us. But we're like, our hair is uncontrollable, right? It defies all sense of gravity and what have you. And that's technology, right? That's our essence. And so, the Crown Act and all those different things, and the stories that in the media that we saw in the late 2000 teens, like 10, 12, 15, 14, and we saw like how many, the media was able to show how many black girls were being suspended from school, how many black girls were getting kicked out of schools, and how many black girls had to change their hair and cut their hair and do all these different things, right? And media was the tool that kept those stories out there. And if it were not for the media and social media, I don't think that the Crown Act would have been able to pass.
Now, locally, in the work that you do with young girls, like, how have you seen them claim their power through your program? Oh,
absolutely. So one of my favorite things is when we do our Divas in the summer, our Divas in the City summer program. And this is when we take girls all around the city to spaces that, whether it's because of segregation or just because of violence, that they are not normally going to. So lunch on the Riverwalk, sitting up and visiting a company, a marketing or media company in the Prudential Towers, and then having lunch on top of the Prudential Towers and looking over, or sailing on Lake Michigan, going to Ida B. Wells' home, all of these different things. What I know is that they see themselves, like they see, like, I belong in this city, not just in my neighborhood, not just on this block.
Powerful.
And so that's one of the biggest things that I see. The other thing I see is that we create a safe space in a city that is unfortunately plagued by this poverty and induced violence. They can be free for the hours and the time that they're with us. They can be safe. And when girls are free and safe, they're liberated. Like, when they feel comfortable, then you really get to see the magic. So that's two of the things. There's so much more, but those are two of the things that really touch me.
The possibilities for them are endless, and their imagination is allowed to run free.
Yes.
I remember before Public Narrative, I was running a After School Matters program, and at one point in time, in working with the young people early on, it was a challenge for them to begin. If I said, like, imagine X, Y, or Z, it was a challenge for them to begin to tap into that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, how do we reactivate your creativity and then create the space for you to learn whatever the skill is you need to learn through this lesson, but do it through and by your creativity so that that's not stifled. And it looks like you've created outlets for these young women. Have any of the young women that you've worked with over the years, have they gone on into careers or gone on to study media at all?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So our first cohort, we didn't, I have to be honest, we were a new organization, so we followed them through 8th grade, from 4th through 8th grade, but then we didn't know to pull the data to follow them through college, because those girls are 24 now. But our girls now who started with us when they were 12 and 13 years old, one of them is going into journalism. She actually just got accepted into UCLA's summer program.
Beautiful.
So she's going to that. In fact, we went to NABJ's Media Summit, LA Media Summit last week, and we took her on the campus so she could see herself at UCLA as a student. So I'm proud of that. Several of our girls are definitely into sports journalism. They are athletes, but they want to do sports journalism as well. They're 16, so that may or may not change, but at least the seed is planted. So yeah, we do. We have most of them who are in our program definitely want to. We have a 16-year-old who's at Kenwood now, who started her own YouTube channel, and yeah, so those are the things that I'm proud to say that they are guided into doing.
Yeah. Did you always plan to have a career in public service, or did you just kind of happen upon it through serving your son's school?
Never. I never took a vow for poverty. I never saw myself doing this. Like, I've always had a heart for my community, and I know that, like, I've always been an advocate ever since I was 9 years old. Now, that's a funny story. We probably don't have time for that, but I knew early on that I was an advocate, and I spoke up against injustice. Got in trouble for that all my life. But doing it as a living, like professionally, never. I wanted to live out in Los Angeles and write for television and movies and do that whole Yvette Lee Bowser thing. But a summer internship in college, where I actually had to live in Los Angeles, let me know that wasn't really what fit my spirit and my soul, like that lifestyle. And so came back home and wound up pregnant when I graduated college. And that took me into a different trajectory. That took me to executive producing at WVON, which is the only Black-owned radio station, talk radio station in the city. And the activism and the history just spoke to me. That's who I was. And so then that took me into a whole different, like, community organizing, activism space. And so then the network that I created and the work that I'd done naturally led me to react to seeing the two students at my son's school and wanting to serve in that way.
Now, how do you apply diversity, equity, and inclusion in the work that you do, particularly as you only serve Black girls?
So for so long, right, it's funny because it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have some feelings about that because it always wants us to go back to assimilation. So it wants you to fit everybody into a melting pot where we are not a melting pot. And so I think my contribution is to shore up these Black girls so that when they show up in spaces, these spaces are ready for them. That these spaces don't make them feel less than, but are ready for them. I don't want them going into spaces where they have to fix their hair a certain way or talk a certain way or present a certain way. I do the work and train corporations as well, corporations and schools, to prepare them for these girls that are coming to them. So, and with our girls, again, just opening them up to other diverse professionals is probably our way of showing them like all of the different aspects that they can be, how they can be. And I think diversity and inclusion and equity, what I found is that they have not looked at age, income, right? So it's not a black and white thing, it's not race thing, but age, income, gender, right? How people identify as gender, which we're seeing a lot of that with our girls, just in terms of how they see themselves. And, you know, I'm being honest, I'm a Gen X, so the whole non-binary is new for me. So learning to include that in so that all girls feel welcome in our program. So yeah, even though it says black girls, there's a lot of layers to black girlhood.
For sure. How do you keep up with all of this and take care of yourself? Because one thing we don't need our leaders burning out prematurely. We don't need our leaders burning out, period. But to be exhausted of this prematurely, in my mind, that means that something goes undone. And this is something that in an ideal situation, you're able to then pass on to someone else who has the endurance to then take it one step further.
Yeah.
Like, how do you preserve your energy and your longevity?
Yeah, so I will tell you that I did experience burnout really badly. Around about 2017, 18, I was completely undone. And I took a year off of program. We didn't really do a whole lot of big stuff that year. And what I found is that I have to set my agenda for what I want. I can't, even though I know the world has to operate in its, time frames, I have to take into account what is right for me. If I wake up and I'm not feeling 100% or my body is telling me that I cannot do it, I cannot do it. I'm also learning to give myself grace. I was just thinking how, because I didn't share this before, but in college I was a reporter for a school newspaper, working at WVON. This is very deadline driven, right? And I was just thinking how my whole reaction is to be deadline driven, like to be right up to the moment. That's dysfunction. And so to release myself from that kind of dysfunction and to give myself grace and space and time is what I'm learning to do. And I will be very vulnerable and transparent to say I'm 47. So to get that at like 45 is a little late in the game. But I think
is it?
I think because of what how society trains us to think, I think that it couldn't have happened before that. This world is changing where people even start talking about burnout or talking about how to rest and things like that. But I think for where I am in my life, I'm okay with giving myself grace and easing away from expectation. Not usurping accountability or responsibility at all, but not beating myself up, and really understanding that everything works in divine timing and divine alignment. And so whatever is, it will work out for the highest good. And so when I set that in motion and tried to do the best that I can in the moment, then I release all of that other stuff because it keeps you pinched. I can give you case studies of my life, but I'm learning to release that. And the Virgo in me too is learning to release all of that tension and intensity because it's just breathe.
I mean, it sounds like you have a clear understanding of how you want to show up in this work, and you know how, like, the headspace you have to be in, the emotion that you need to sit with, in order to be able to show up in the way that you want to, and to deliver the experience you want for the girls to have. When young women step away from your program, and let's say they maximize their entire time with you, what do you hope that they come away with and can look back and say of their time with girls like me?
Oh, wow. So I want them to be able to say first and foremost that someone believed in them and cared enough about them to pour into them. I want them to feel affirmed and to always be aware of the girls in the room that are like them, and always create the same space for themselves and those girls to fully be, meaning nobody's judging anybody, nobody's criticizing. We are supporting and linking up. And lastly, I want them to go out into this world without apology, whether they are in media or not, because this is not about necessarily media, training them to be in media. It's training them to understand that media can be used as a tool, either good or bad, and to resist when it's bad and to take claim of it when it's good. And again, be unapologetic, like show up as who they are, knowing that they are bringing magic to spaces.
Now, what would you say to someone who's looking to tap into this space, but they don't quite know where to start?
Into the space of?
So we understand how to connect young girls to your program. And you'll, at the end of our time, you can share more about like the platforms folks can connect with. But say someone is interested in being a mentor, like but they don't know exactly where to start. Where would you point them?
Good question. And this is not just for my organization. This is period. When people want to mentor, I get a lot of pushback, but I want us to do our work first. So many of us go into work because we want to heal our own girl child. And so every girl who is in front of us, we project our own slights or our own shortcomings or what didn't happen for us when we were children. We want that to happen for them. Well, these girls have their own stories, their own narrative, their own lineage. So I would say first just do your own work, making sure that you are able. Now, you don't have to be perfect, right? I'm not saying that. But I'm saying identify what your healing points are. There's a book called Inspiring Our Girls by Naimbi Eccles. And it's 10 points of how to work with inspiring the souls of Black girls, something like that. I'll get you the title so you can put it in the notes. But I use that as a book that's recommended for all of people who sign up with us. I also say that make sure that you understand very clearly what your role will be in someone's life. Sometimes you will be the only positive force in that person's life. And then also make sure that you have the time and the space to do so, like the time that it takes to commit. And keep your word when you're working with young people, period. Just keep your word. And you do not have to be perfect. That's what I want to make sure people understand. You don't have to be perfect. You have to be aware, self-aware, but you do not have to be perfect. And I think a lot of people wait until they feel like, you got to make this amount of money, you got to show up looking like this, and they do not care. They don't care. They care, what do you care about me? Like, why are you here? Are you here for a check? Or are you here because you really care about me? And if you're there for the righteous reasons, you'll be a great mentor.
Yeah. When I worked with After School Matters, I also was like working other projects and spending quite a bit of time with adults. But my time with youth was my time to unplug and just prepare me for working with adults again. And I thought it was weird because when I had reached my threshold with adults, it's just that time to go in and work with the young people, and we can focus on the issue. We can focus on solutions. We can focus on the things that they came to be a part of, and really exploring like how they show up in media and what how they utilize certain tools for telling their stories and whatnot. And I missed that. But what I learned was that even in the work that we do at Public Narrative, there is important that there be some sort of passion project connected to help like fuel. And so the summer would always be my favorite time for the organization because that's when we would work with youth in programs and such. But I'm inspired by your story. I did not know to that extent like how you got here, and I'm really curious of like when is the book coming?
So the book came. I wrote Move Beyond the Block in 2018. It's a book about it profiles 18 Black women who.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear. When does the book of your story come?
Oh,
yes.
Well, I've been thinking about doing a small documentary.
Okay.
So that is planned to be, going over the ideas and everything and working with someone right now. And we'll be fleshing that all out. We're dedicating the summer while I'm out of school to doing that work. Yeah.
I know we have a lot of folks in common. I think we have Dr. Shaniqua Jones in common.
Yes.
So Dr. Jones,
Dr. J,
we
yes.
did an episode with Dr. Jones, and
That's my little sister. I love her.
That pen stays ready. And so just in learning of her story and how she's been able to leverage her story, like what strength do you gain from tapping into your own lived experience and applying that through like the solutions that you implement through the work?
So I'll tell you one thing, because my book is part memoir, part women's history, and some lessons that I learned that I share. I think for me, it's more, again, selfish reasons, self-interest. When I wrote that book, I planned to, when I first sat down to write a book, my plan was to expose all of these people who had been abusers in my life, right? Mental abusers and whatnot. And I had this big plan of, I guess, I'm gonna finally tell all this stuff. And in the writing, I was released from that. I found forgiveness. I found a lightheartedness that allowed me to show up not as a cynical person and not as a person who wants to get revenge or vengeance or this anger, but in a way that's very light and in a way that wants to be a light. So I think in writing your story, you are a light and a guidepost for those who are still trying to find their way, and you do it in a way that's not a glaring light that blinds people, but in an inviting, warm, like sunlight light. So that's what I get out of telling my story, and I think people then feel that feel the radiance of it and want to come into the light, and they bring their own pain, their own healing, and we find a way forward to do that together.
Totally. Now, how can folks connect with your work?
So you can follow girlslikmeproject.org. That's our website. We're Girls Like Me Project on Instagram as well. We're also Girls Like Me Project on Facebook. And then I would love for people to sign up for our newsletter. We also have a podcast called Dear Chicago Girls. We also have a talk show called Glimpy Talks, which is great. And we're still accepting year-round hosts and producers and workers for that. I think those are all the places. And they can also email us to info at girlslikemeproject.org.
Okay, excellent. This has been great.
It has. You have no idea, like the bright spots that I look for in the week of all of the grant deadlines and all this other stuff. This has been a very bright light. Thank you so much.
Good.
And this set is so beautiful too. Like, this is wonderful. I'm proud of you. I really am.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I don't recall when we first met. I want to say it was something census related.
Yeah, I have a beautiful memory. Yeah, okay. It was definitely the census. It was out in Oak Brook, I believe it was. And Stacey Abrams' sister was there. And Aprisha Faulkner introduced us.
Well, I'm so glad to be connected
I am too, right before COVID, actually.
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
And we'll be doing some more work. I think how we keep connecting, I think there is definitely something intentional that we must do together.
Absolutely. And just know, like, I recognize how important it is to have allies. And I don't mean just for the sake of like giving the title, but folks who truly are, advocates. And I'm more than happy to continue to be that and just like watch you shine.
Thank you. Same.
I mean, and the work that you're doing with these young women is profound.
Same.
Yeah.
I watch you, and when something's been around for so long, to see new, fresh breath blown into something. Not to say that it wasn't good before, but just to see the way we just show up and rock stuff is just different. And I'm always cheering for the sister. So unapologetically.
I appreciate it.
And you're just rocking it. I mean, you're bringing new. This is different, right? So keep doing it.
This for me, just coming into the organization and learning its history. I didn't want to come in and change a bunch of stuff because I could, and my title said that I could. I wanted to understand the impact and, frankly, what it meant to folks who had been invested for so long. And what I recognize is that this is a platform that Public Narrative manages, but it's truly a platform that belongs to the people.
Yes.
And in what way can we invite folks in
Yes.
to share their stories, receive support and help as they need, even as they go out and build and help establish, or even reestablish for that matter, different parts of Chicago that have either been neglected, mismanaged, misused, misrepresented. You know, it's all sorts of harm that has been done in different ways. And I think that each audience that has experienced harm on some level would speak of it differently. But what I'm noticing is that we have the change makers in our midst to address those audiences as needed.
Yeah, and I wanted to tell you, your approach is so Sankofa, like to go back and not to release or to discard history, but to take it, hone it, and then also move it to the next higher level. And everybody can appreciate that, right? Those who have invested their history, their time, can be proud of where it's going and know that they were a part of it. And you get to also flourish and also have your brilliance shine. And you know, because you have to have some self-gratification as well in the work we do. And to do it in a way that changes and uplifts voices and provides platforms, because everybody doesn't get their interview on the top 5, you know, media outlets. Everybody doesn't get their shining fame, 15 minutes of fame, but to have it in conversation.
Absolutely.
Right. Where you learn about people and you can learn how they can support you and you can support them. I think it's beautiful.
For sure.
This is beautiful.
Well, thank you. And
Absolutely.
thank you for just highlighting that about Public Narrative's legacy, and even for being a part of it by being on this episode of the podcast.
I'm so happy. Thank you. This was a delight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching the Public Narrative Podcast. I'm your host, Jhmira Alexander, was joined here today by Lakeisha Gray-Sewell. We'll see you again shortly.